Greetings, my friends. My name is Sage, and at the end of this journey, not only do I want you to be completely relaxed and asleep, but I want you to better understand how Fred and George effortlessly get away with all of their stunts, and how you might be able to do the same in your own life. The burrow had never known such simultaneous chaos and joy as on the April day the twins arrived. Fred and George Weasley entered the world in a whirlwind that never truly settled. Two identical forces of nature wrapped in blankets. From their first breaths, they seemed to operate on a shared mysterious frequency, their cries harmonizing, their sleeping patterns perfectly synchronized. Their mother Molly often found them in their cribs, not crying for attention, but quietly observing each other with wide, identical eyes, as if conducting a silent conversation only they could hear. Their early childhood was a symphony of coordinated mischief conducted within the crooked, comforting walls of their home, while their older brothers, Bill, Charlie and Percy, carved out their own distinct paths. Fred and George moved as a single entity. They devised elaborate games in the orchard, their laughter a match set echoing through the apple trees. Their first accidental magic was a joint affair. At age 3, frustrated by Percy's insistence on tidying their toy dragon collection, they simultaneously made his hair turn a brilliant shade of violet. The shock on their rule-following brother's face was their first shared masterpiece, a lesson in the delightful power of unified surprise. Percy, with his prefect badges and love for regulations, became their natural opposite and favourite catalyst. Where he saw order, they saw a playground. His attempts to enforce bedtime or organise their chaotic corner of the room were met with a seamless, wordless defence. One would create a diversion, knocking over a stack of books, while the other would swiftly hide the contested item. They developed a language of glances, slight nods, and imperceptible smirks that made them formidable. Their parents often despaired of ever telling them apart, but they never felt the need to. They were Fred and George, a compound creature of boundless energy and identical grins. Their bond was their primary magic, a deep instinctual connection that felt more fundamental than any spell. They felt each other's scrapes, shared unspoken jokes across crowded rooms, and dreamed in similar hues of marauding adventure. In a bustling household of 7 children, they created a world for 2, a partnership forged before memory. This inseparable unit, born in laughter and solidified in silent understanding, was the bedrock upon which everything else would be built. A lifelong dynamic of shared thoughts, mirrored smiles, and a singular, glorious purpose to spread their particular brand of joyful chaos. They were a team before they could walk, partners before they could talk, and their story began not as 2 separate lives, but as one magnificent, mischievous whole. The Hogwarts Express was a corridor of endless possibility, and Fred and George Weasley claimed it with matching, predatory grins. Their sorting was a foregone conclusion, whispered by every prankster ghost in the castle. The moment the battered hat touched Fred's head, it shouted "Gryffindor!" before he could even think a thought. George's took a second longer, as if the hat was pondering the delightful chaos inherent in the pair, but the result was identical. They slid onto the bench in the Great Hall as a unit, their eyes already scanning the enchanted ceiling, not with wonder, but with a professional appraisal of its prank potential. Their reputation as troublemakers was cemented before the first week's end. The castle, with its shifting staircases, secret passages, and abundance of unused classrooms, was not a school to them. It was a vast laboratory for applied mischief. Their early magical experiments were conducted in a disused broom cupboard on the third floor, a space that smelled of damp wood and invention. Here they perfected their first marketable product, canary creams. Initial tests resulted in everything from feathers to full-sized squawking birds that terrorized the owlery, but through trial, error, and several hastily vanished explosions, they refined the charm. The final product was a masterpiece of subtlety, a innocent-looking shortbread biscuit that, upon consumption, transformed the eater into a large canary for exactly 60 seconds before depositing them, slightly dazed and feather-strewn, back to normal. Their primary adversaries in these formative years were not other students, but the custodians of order. Argus Filch and his wheezing cat, Mrs. Norris, became their personal benchmarks for stealth. They learned the patterns of his patrols, the squeak of his shoes on specific flagstones, and turned their evasion into an art form. Their relationship with Professor Snape was of a different, more electric quality. His dungeon domain was a fortress of rules and simmering disdain, and breaching it became their greatest challenge. A stink pellet deployed in a potion storage cupboard, charmed to activate only when Snape himself opened it, earned them their first detention together, a point of immense pride. They scrubbed cauldrons in the dungeon with identical looks of serene satisfaction, their ears still ringing with his silken threats. Their greatest asset, however, was a discovery that transformed them from mere nuisances into institutional legends. In their second year, after a particularly narrow escape from Filch near the trophy room, they discovered a piece of enchanted parchment hidden in a drawer of a particularly ugly cabinet. It was blank until, with a shared spark of intuition, George tapped it with his wand and uttered, "I solemnly swear I am up to no good." The map that blossomed across the parchment, revealing every soul in the castle and the secret passages between them, felt less like a discovery and more like a destiny fulfilled. The Marauder's map was the key to the kingdom. Now they could see Filch and Mrs. Norris as labelled dots moving through the corridors. They could watch Snape pacing in his office. They could plan their routes with military precision, their movements ghostly and untraceable. The map, created by kindred spirits of a previous generation, validated their entire ethos. Hogwarts was not a place to be endured. It was a puzzle to be solved, a system to be playfully subverted, and with the map in their possession, they were its new and rightful masters. Their experiments grew bolder, their escapes more flawless, and their twin grins, seen flickering at the end of a suddenly empty corridor, became a symbol of elusive, laughing rebellion. Their academic strategy was a masterpiece of selective investment, a curriculum of their own design hidden within the school's official syllabus. In the eyes of most professors, Fred and George Weasley were charming underachievers, their minds seemingly elsewhere during lectures on goblin rebellions or the properties of moonstone. But in charms and transfiguration, they were unspoken prodigies. They paid rapt, silent attention to Professor Flitwick's precise wand movements, not for the love of scholarly pursuit, but for the potential applications in enchanting objects to behave in unexpected ways. A simple levitation charm became the basis for a line of self-stirring cauldrons that would eventually stir their contents right over the rim. Transfiguration, under Professor McGonagall's stern eye, was not about turning beetles into buttons, but about understanding the fundamental plasticity of matter. Knowledge crucial for creating skiving snack boxes that could convincingly mimic symptoms of illness. Their feigned disinterest was a carefully maintained facade. They cultivated a reputation for last-minute passable essays, and practical exams that demonstrated just enough competence to avoid remedial sessions, all while their real work, the intricate schematics for portable swamps and extendable ears, was hidden beneath floorboards and behind loose stones. Their dormitory became a workshop, its air perpetually tinged with the scent of gunpowder and dried frog liver, a testament to experiments conducted long after curfew. They protected Harry Potter not out of any grand heroic impulse, but with the fierce, unspoken logic that he was part of their orbit, a fellow rule-breaker who deserved their particular brand of support. Their rescue in the Flying Ford Anglia was executed with a pilot's cool precision, a daring extraction mission performed with more glee than gravity. When the school panicked over Sirius Black's supposed murderous intent, the twins became a mobile, mischievous shield for Gryffindor. They patrolled the common room's periphery, not with wands drawn in dramatic defence, but with pockets full of prototype decoy detonators, their presence a reassuring promise that fear would not have the last word. They turned anxiety into anticipation, their very laughter a bulwark against the creeping dread. Their grand exit from Hogwarts in their 5th year was not an expulsion, but a statement, a piece of performance art that cemented their legend. It was born not from failure, but from a final glorious collision with the forces of petty authority, now embodied by Dolores Umbridge. Her reign of educational decrees and cruel quills was the antithesis of everything they valued. The swamp they created in a corridor was their magnum opus, a defiant, thriving ecosystem of murky water and croaking frogs that resisted all removal charms. It was a monument to magical ingenuity over bureaucratic oppression. Their departure was a masterclass in timing. They waited for the perfect moment, a crowded hallway, Umbridge sputtering with rage, and then, with a synchronized flourish, they mounted their brooms. They soared through the enchanted ceiling of the entrance hall, a shower of brilliant, custom-designed fireworks erupting in their wake, dragon-shaped explosions that zoomed around Umbridge's head, sparkling, insulting words that hung in the air. They did not flee, they staged a revolution's first act. As they disappeared into the clear sky, leaving behind a stunned silence and a defiant, festering swamp, they crossed the threshold from students to symbols. Hogwarts had been their playground, their laboratory, their testing ground. Now the wider world awaited, and they flew towards it together, leaving a trail of fire and laughter in their wake, their education complete on their own triumphant terms. The pouch of gold felt heavier than its weight in galleons. In the cramped, familiar chaos of their attic room at the Burrow, Fred and George stared at the small fortune Harry Potter had pressed into their hands, his Triwizard winnings, given without a second thought. The coins glinted in the lamplight, not as currency, but as pure, unadulterated potential. It was the final ingredient, the seed money for a dream they had whispered about since their first canary cream. The moment was profound, a silent pact sealed in gold, but it lasted only a heartbeat before they were moving, the energy between them crackling with purpose. The dreaming was over, the forging had begun. Their first laboratory was a converted shed at the bottom of the Weasley garden, magically expanded and warded with every secrecy charm they could muster. Here, amid the smell of damp earth and ozone, their core product lines took shape. The skiving snack box was their masterpiece of magical misdirection. It required a delicate, brutal understanding of both medicinal magic and human biology. Days were spent cross-referencing symptom-inducing hexes with common malady descriptions in old healers' texts. They tested prototypes on themselves, enduring hours of fake fever, convincing nosebleeds, and genuine nausea to perfect the timing of the antidote portion. George once spent an entire afternoon vomiting spectacularly coloured bubbles until Fred nailed the counter charm. The decoy detonator was a product of defensive ingenuity, born from their time dodging filch and umbrage. It needed to create a convincing multi-sensory diversion: sound, smoke and movement. They sourced Peruvian instant darkness powder from Mundungus Fletcher and enchanted small rune-carved stones to emit a deafening bang and a sprinting shadowy figure. The shed's walls were permanently scorched in several places. Securing the Diagon Alley premises was a campaign of its own. The location at number 93 was perfect. A dusty, narrow shop, sandwiched between two established stores, its windows grimed over, a forgotten space in the bustling lane. The elderly warlock who owned it was deeply sceptical. He saw two young red-haired jesters, not businessmen. Their meeting in his musty parlour was a performance. Fred did the talking, all easy charm and grandiose projections, while George silently presented meticulously detailed product schematics, financial plans scribbled on parchment, and samples. They watched the warlock's eyebrows raise as a decoy detonator sent a cloud of screaming smoke around his china cabinet. The deposit they laid down, a sizable chunk of Harry's gold, landed with a definitive thud. The keys changed hands, stepping into the empty, echoing shop for the first time. As its owners, they were met not with awe, but with a mountain of work. Dust lay thick as snow, and the air was stale. Their work ethic became a force of nature. For months, they lived in the shop, surviving on stale cauldron cakes and self-brewed coffee. By day, they were carpenters, painters, and charm weavers transforming the space. They built the winding, vibrant displays themselves, enchanted the ceiling to mimic a sunny sky, and painstakingly applied the brilliant, flashing gold paint to the signage, Weasley's Wizard Wheezes. By night, they were inventors, production line workers, and quality control. Their hands grew calloused from stirring cauldrons and sanding wood. They faced doubt like a constant, low hum, from nervous family, from sneering passers-by who saw the frantic activity behind papered windows, from their own moments of exhaustion in the pre-dawn gloom. But the doubt never found purchase. It was vaporized by the sheer heat of their shared vision, by the silent language of a glance that said, "Keep going," by the tangible reality of a skiving snack box that worked perfectly, or a stack of shield hats waiting for their final enchantment. They were not just building a shop, they were building a fortress of fun, brick by magical brick, joke by glorious joke. Their ingenuity and relentless drive, the only magic strong enough to make a laughingstock of every skeptic. The dream was no longer a sketch on parchment. It was in the sawdust on the floor, the smell of fresh paint, and the weight of the key in Fred's pocket. It was forged, solid, and almost ready for the world. The grand opening of Weasley's Wizard Wheezes was a flare of defiant colour against a greying sky. Diagon Alley, in the shadow of Voldemort's return, moved under a pall of whispered rumours and furtive glances. Shops had closed, windows were shuttered. The air tasted of fear and suspicion. Into this gloom, on a bright April morning, Fred and George unleashed their revolution. The moment they pulled back the doors, a cascade of light, sound, and impossible wonder flooded the street. The enchanted ceiling swirled with playful clouds. Automated displays demonstrated products with cheerful pops and bangs. Shelves groaned under the weight of skiving snack boxes, decoy detonators, and 10-metre-long rolls of reusable hangman's noose. A crowd drawn by the noise and brilliance gathered not as shoppers, but as refugees seeking sunlight. The twins stood at the threshold, identical in magnificent magenta dress robes. Their grins not just welcoming, but challenging. In a world demanding solemnity, their shop was a declaration. Joy was an act of rebellion. Their products, conceived in laughter, swiftly morphed into essential tools of quiet resistance. The skiving snack box became a celebrated method for avoiding ministry-sanctioned lectures on magical discipline. The decoy detonator found new purpose creating diversions during unwanted interrogations or for scattering groups of snooping snatchers. The shield hats and cloaks, initially a humorous line of proactive defence, began selling faster than they could stock them, purchased by worried parents and cautious travellers. Each purchase felt less like a transaction and more like a pact. Customers would meet the twins' eyes with a knowing, grim smile as they pocketed a patented daydream charm or a set of extendable ears. The shop became a sanctuary, a place where the oppressive weight of the outside world was held at bay by the sheer, stubborn force of inventiveness. It was a hub of morale, proving that creativity and courage could coexist, that even in fear, one could choose to laugh. This rebellion found its most potent battlefield at Hogwarts, under the tyrannical rule of Dolores Umbridge. The twins' mail-order business operated via a network of loyal first years and cleverly charmed owls, became a lifeline for the student body. Skiving snack boxes were smuggled into the castle in parcels of sugar quills and textbooks, allowing students to escape her dreadful detentions. Puking pastilles were used strategically to clear classrooms. Their conflict with Umbridge was waged in absentia, a guerrilla war of postal mischief that drove her to fits of apoplectic rage. She would storm the halls, finding classrooms half empty, her educational decrees defaced by shimmering, unremovable graffiti that spelled out rude words in flashing colours. She knew the source, but her authority ended at the Hogwarts gates, and the twins, safe in their Diagon Alley fortress, were untouchable. Their crowning achievement in this covert war was the creation and deployment of the portable swamp. It was not merely a prank, it was a strategic masterpiece, an environmental protest. They developed it in their back room, refining a chaotic, spreading enchantment into a contained, pocket-sized packet of concentrated anarchy. Smuggled into the castle by a brave accomplice, it was activated in a fifth-floor corridor. The swamp did not simply appear, it erupted, a thriving, fetid wetland of murky water, thick reeds, and croaking frogs that spread with alarming speed, resisting all standard vanishing spells and cleaning charms. It was a physical manifestation of their philosophy, a beautiful, messy, living obstacle to sterile control. Umbridge's fury was a spectacle. She ordered it removed, but even the combined efforts of the staff could only partially contain it. Professor Flitwick, it was rumoured, left a small corner intact, calling it a really impressive bit of magic. The swamp stood, a monument to magical ingenuity over bureaucratic oppression, a soggy, defiant middle finger to fear. It proved that the twins' influence was not diminished by distance. Their spirit, bottled and mailed, could turn a corridor into a legend and a toad-like woman into a punchline. Their shop was more than a business. It was the command centre for a rebellion fought with laughter, and every product sold was a spell cast against the gathering dark. The joke shop's vibrant interior became a canvas for a darker purpose. The same shelves that held daydream charms and dung bombs now concealed maps of Death Eater movements, stacks of enchanted parchment for secure communication, and prototype defensive gear. Weasley's wizard wheezes, that bastion of laughter, had quietly become a vital headquarters for the Order of the Phoenix. The secret passage behind the fake wall of you-know-poo displays led to a cramped windowless room where serious faces were lit by the glow of strategic diagrams. Fred and George moved through this dual existence with seamless precision. By day they were the cheerful proprietors, their banter a comforting constant for a nervous public. By night they were engineers of resistance, their inventive minds pivoting from pranks to protection. Their combat innovations were born from the same principles that guided their jokes: misdirection, surprise, and a deep understanding of human nature. The shield hats evolved. No longer just novelty items, they were now woven with layered protective charms, capable of deflecting minor curses, and in one upgraded model, emitting a localized burst of disorienting light. Their most effective creation was the Enchanted Fog, a development from their Peruvian instant darkness powder. Stored in small throwable vials, it released a dense, pearlescent mist that not only obscured vision, but also scrambled magical detection, creating a smokescreen under which Order members could disapparate or regroup. They tested these in the dead of night, in a magically expanded back room, the air thick with swirling grey clouds and the sharp cracks of practice apparition. Their work was methodical, meticulous, and entirely devoid of their usual laughter. This was a different kind of mischief, with the highest possible stakes. Their participation in the Battle of the Seven Potters was a voluntary plunge into the storm. When the plan was outlined in the grim confines of the Order's room, they did not hesitate. The danger was not an abstraction. It was a sky likely to be full of Death Eaters and the killing curse. Yet the chance to actively protect Harry, to use their flying skills, honed from years of dodging bludgers and filch in a real battle, was a call they answered in unison. On that chaotic night, they were not shopkeepers or pranksters, but combatants. Mounted on their brooms, they were two more red-headed decoys, weaving through the chilling air over Surrey. George's ear was severed by a slicing curse meant for his neck, a flash of searing pain, and sudden lopsided silence. The injury was a brutal lesson in the cost of this shadow war, a cost paid in flesh and blood, not just galleons. Yet, even as George clutched the side of his head, his brother guiding his broom earthward, their resolve did not fracture, it hardened. The fight had become personal. Their loyalty to the cause was fierce but guarded. They trusted Dumbledore's vision and followed Moody's gruff orders, but their faith was placed in people, not institutions. They had seen the Ministry's corruption firsthand under Umbridge. Their allegiance was to their family, to Harry, to the network of allies who used their shop as a sanctuary. They asked few questions but observed everything, their twin perspectives creating a comprehensive picture of the Order's operations. They provided safe houses via undetectable extension charms on seemingly innocent products, turned their Owl Order service into an intelligence network, and used their extensive knowledge of secret passages, both magical and mundane, to move people and supplies under the Ministry's nose. Their humour did not vanish, but it transformed into a grim, sharp-edged wit, a coping mechanism against the pervasive dread. They were warriors who fought not with roaring defiance, but with silent ingenuity. Their greatest weapon, the enemy's underestimation of two jesters. In the shadows of the war, Fred and George Weasley proved that the line between a joke and a tactic was vanishingly thin, and that the spirit of rebellion, once ignited, that could forge pranksters into pillars of a resistance. The castle was a symphony of screams and shattered stone, a cacophony where the very air tasted of ozone and ash. Fred and George moved through the maelstrom of the Battle of Hogwarts, not as soldiers marching to grim duty, but as conductors of chaos, their wands weaving a counter-melody of defiant joy. They fought back to back in the crumbling entrance hall, a familiar, unshakable stance perfected in 100 childhood skirmishes. Their spells were not the lethal green of the killing curse, but brilliant bursts of orange and gold, hexes that turned Death Eater's robes to jelly, or made their boots sing loudly with every step, ruining their stealth. A swarm of enchanted fireworks, leftover stock from their grand exit, zoomed and shrieked around their heads, dive-bombing attackers with showers of stinging sparks. Their laughter, sharp and clear, cut through the din, a weapon as disorienting as any spell. To hear mirth in that place of terror was to experience a profound cognitive dissonance, and they wielded it expertly. The reunion with Percy was a moment of surreal, piercing clarity amidst the blur of combat. He appeared in a doorway, his ministry robes torn and smudged with soot, his face a mask of frantic determination, utterly unlike his usual priggish composure. He was duelling a masked Death Eater, his movements competent but rigid. Fred saw him first, a flash of familiar, dishevelled red hair. A shared glance with George was all it took. In a synchronised manoeuvre, George sent a decoy detonator skittering past the Death Eater's feet, the bang and smoke causing the foe to stagger. Fred's jelly legs jinx hit him a second later, dropping him to the floor, where he wobbled helplessly. There was a heartbeat of silence in their immediate vicinity. Percy stared at them, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his expression a tumultuous mix of shame, relief, and desperate apology. Then Fred grinned, that old, irreverent, brotherly grin. "Nice of you to drop in, Perce," he shouted over the noise. "Bit behind on the fun, but you always were a slow starter." And Percy, the rule follower, the ministry man, did the most unexpected thing. He laughed, a wet, choked, joyous sound, and for a moment the three brothers were not in a battlefield, but in the Burrow's kitchen, united against some childish absurdity. The reconciliation was wordless, absolute, and sealed in the shared, insane humour of the moment. Percy fell into step beside them, and the duo became a trio, their spells now weaving together, a family reunited in the furnace. Their fighting style was a beautiful, terrible improvisation of their life's work. A Death Eater lunged from behind a fallen statue, and George hit him with a modified, puking pastille charm, causing the man to double over, retching uncontrollably. Fred vanished the stairs beneath another, sending him tumbling into a cloud of their own enchanted fog, from which confused shouts and misplaced curses erupted. They used the castle itself, their old playground, with intimate knowledge. They lured pursuers into a corridor they knew was patrolled by Peeves, who was gleefully pelting everyone with broken furniture. They sealed a doorway with a rapid, sticky field charm, based on their own Dr. Filibuster's glue. Each spell was a punchline, each hex a jest with deadly serious intent. Their energy seemed boundless, fed by the adrenaline of their reunion and the righteous fury of defending their home. They were a whirlwind of red hair and brilliant light, a testament to the fact that laughter could be a war cry. But the tide of the battle was a living thing, pushing and pulling, fracturing order into 1,000 desperate skirmishes. A tremendous explosion from the upper floors shook the castle to its foundations, raining dust and debris. A surge of dueling combatants, a mix of order members, students, and snarling Death Eaters flooded into the entrance hall, becoming a chaotic, shifting scrum. In the press, a curse shattered the remaining front doors into 1,000 splintered projectiles. The force of the blast and the sudden rush of bodies created a violent current. Fred, deflecting a slicing hex aimed at a young Hufflepuff, was pushed towards the gaping maw of the doorway. George, turning to shield Percy from a jet of purple flame, found himself driven back towards the grand staircase. For a second, their eyes met across the swirling chaos, a glance that held a lifetime of shared thoughts. A quick, confident smirk from Fred, a nod from George. Then the battle's tide swallowed them, separating the twins onto different fronts. George watched Fred's red head disappear into the smoke and tumult near the shattered entrance, still cracking a joke over his shoulder that was lost to the roar. The separation felt wrong, a crack in the universe's fabric, but there was no time to dwell. The fight demanded everything. George turned, his brother's laughter still echoing in his mind, and plunged back into the fray. The empty space at his side, a silent, screaming anomaly in the heart of the storm. The explosion was not a sound, but an ending. It was a thunderclap of absolute negation that originated from somewhere near the castle's shattered entrance. A wave of force that seemed to silence the world before the roar of collapsing stone even registered. George, dueling a masked Death Eater halfway up the grand staircase, felt it in his bones, a deep, resonant wrongness that had nothing to do with the curse he just dodged. His head snapped toward the source, his heart performing a frantic, stumbling beat against his ribs. The laughter that had been on his lips seconds before, a sharp retort to his opponent's sneer, died into a vacuum of pure dread. Through the billowing dust and acrid smoke, he saw the aftermath. A section of the ancient wall had been blown inward, creating a jagged maw of broken masonry and splintered wood. Figures lay scattered, some moving, some horrifically still. And there, apart from the others, was a familiar shape, sprawled on the stone floor, draped in a dusting of pale powder, like a cruel parody of snow. Fred's robes were the same brilliant magenta they had charmed for luck, now dulled by debris. He was not moving. The world did not slow down, it fractured. The ongoing battle around George, the flashes of light, the screams, the guttural shouts, receded into a distant, meaningless hum. His vision tunneled until it contained only that still form and the impossible, growing silence expanding from it. A silence so profound it seemed to swallow the very echoes of the castle. He did not remember moving. He was simply there, kneeling on the hard, cold stone, his knees impacting with a jar that felt like it belonged to someone else. His wand hung uselessly from his fingers. The air around Fred was oddly clear, the dust settling in the eerie calm that sometimes follows a cataclysm. George reached out, his hand trembling violently, and brushed the powder from his brother's face. Fred's features were untouched by the blast, peaceful, as if he had simply lain down for a rest in the middle of the chaos, a final private joke. His eyes were closed, a faint, knowing smirk still playing about his lips, frozen in time. George placed a hand on his chest, feeling no rise, no fall, only a terrible, absolute stillness, where for 20 years there had been a mirrored heartbeat. The connection, that constant, silent hum of twinness that had been the background music of his entire life, snapped. It did not fade, it was severed with the brutal finality of an axe blow, leaving behind a phantom limb of the soul, a screaming, empty frequency. A raw, wounded sound echoed in the vaulted space, and George realised it had come from him. From somewhere to his left, Percy stumbled into view, his face a mask of ash and horror. He fell to his knees beside George, his mouth working soundlessly, his hands fluttering over Fred as if he could undo what had been done. Then came a piercing, anguished cry, their mother appearing like an avenging fury from the smoke, her face collapsing into a grief so vast it seemed it would swallow the castle whole. She gathered Fred's upper body into her arms, rocking slightly, her sobs a physical force in the air. Arthur was there too, his face aged a century in an instant, a hand on Molly's shoulder, his other hand reaching to grip George's arm, the contact anchoring nothing. The shockwave radiated outwards, a tremor through the family and their allies. Bill, his face scarred and fierce, turned from his duel with a roar of pure rage. Charlie, covered in soot, faltered in his spellcasting. For a handful of heartbeats, the battle around the Weasleys seemed to pause, as if the universe itself was acknowledging the magnitude of this one specific loss amidst the anonymous carnage. George did not hear the spell zipping past his head. He did not feel the grit digging into his knees. His entire being was focused on the simple, impossible task of retrieval. He slid his arms under his brother's shoulders and knees, the weight familiar and yet utterly alien. He stood, cradling Fred against his chest, turning his back on the ongoing fight. Percy moved to help, but George shook his head. A minute of fierce movement. This was his to carry. He walked, step by deliberate step, away from the shattered entrance, into the relative shelter of a nearby alcove, where a suit of armour lay in pieces. He knelt again, laying Fred down with a tenderness that belied the surrounding violence, arranging his limbs, smoothing his hair. The silence in that small space was a dome, holding out the war. George sat back on his heels, staring at the face that was his own, and yet was not, waiting for the eyes to open, for the smirk to twitch into a full grin, for the joke to be revealed. He waited for the punchline that would never come. Outside the alcove, the battle raged on, a world of noise and light and death, but inside there was only the profound, deafening silence of a universe halved, and one twin keeping watch over the other, for the first and last time, alone. The world did not end with a bang, but with a quiet, persistent wrongness. In the days following the battle, George moved through a landscape bleached of colour and sound, a ghost in his own life. The burrow was a monument to absence. Every chair, every corner of the garden, every joke half formed on his tongue, echoed with a silence that was not silence, but the deafening lack of an answering thought. He would turn to share a glance and meet empty air. The reflex was a fresh wound each time. His body felt unbalanced, as if he had lost a physical limb, his equilibrium permanently off. Sleeping was impossible. The twin bed in his old room, which had always felt like half of a whole, was a vast, lonely island. He would lie awake, staring at the ceiling they had charmed as children to show a miniature, swirling galaxy, and feel the phantom pull of a connection that had been severed, leaving a raw psychic stump. The memorial service was a blur of black robes and tear-streaked faces, a public performance of grief he endured in a numb daze. He stood with his family, a red-headed line now forever broken, and listened to the praises of Fred's bravery and humour. The words felt distant, describing a concept, not the living, breathing presence that had been his other half. People clasped his shoulder, their eyes full of a pity that made his skin crawl. They saw one twin and mourned the other. George mourned himself. He felt halved, incomplete, a sentence missing its verb. The magical implications of the loss were profound and private. Weeks later, in the quiet of the shop's back room, he tried, on a whim, to conjure his Patronus. The silver mist erupted from his wand, and after a moment of painful churning, resolved not into the familiar, bounding jackrabbit that had always matched Fred's, but into a large, solitary hare. It was similar, yet unmistakably alone. It circled him once, a silent, shimmering testament to the change, before dissolving. The magic itself acknowledged the rupture. Their unique, wordless communication was gone, not as a skill forgotten, but as a channel with no receiver, leaving only static in his mind. The shop was the hardest and the only possible thing. Reopening Weasley's Wizard Wheezes felt like a betrayal and a duty in equal measure. The vibrant, buzzing space felt cavernous. He moved through the aisles alone, his footsteps echoing where there should have been a matching set. He kept everything exactly as it was: the flashing signs, the automated displays, the swamp in a box demonstration, perpetually cycling in the corner. It was a museum to their dream, a bittersweet tribute operated by its sole surviving architect. He worked with a grim, mechanical focus, brewing skiving snack boxes and charming decoy detonators with flawless, joyless precision. The products were still brilliant, still bestsellers, but their creation was now a solitary labour. Customers would enter, their faces bright with expectation, then falter slightly when they saw him alone behind the counter. Some offered condolences, most just bought their extendable ears and portable swamps with a respectful, heavy quiet. The laughter in the shop was now external, something he facilitated but could not fully join. He was the keeper of the flame, ensuring the fire of their mischief still warmed the world, even if it could no longer warm him. The legacy Fred left behind was not in stone or speeches, but in the very air of the place they built. It was in the determined grin George sometimes forced onto his face for a child's benefit, a ghost of the old smile. It was in the products that continued to spread defiant laughter. It was in the empty space beside him that everyone saw and no one mentioned, a space that was, in its own way, a permanent, aching monument. George learned to live with the empty space. He filled it with work, with family, with the quiet management of their empire. But some nights, after closing, he would sit on the counter in the darkened shop, surrounded by the sleeping inventions, and simply feel the absence like a physical weight. The partnership was over. The dream endured, but it was a solo performance now, played to a hall that would always, forever, echo with the memory of the second harmony. Time, as it must, flowed onward from that moment of silence in the alcove. The wizarding world rebuilt, its scars fading into history, but the mark left by Fred and George Weasley proved indelible, woven into the very fabric of the new piece. Weasley's Wizard Wheezes did not merely survive, it thrived, expanding into a multi-story emporium of wonder that became as essential a Diagon Alley landmark as Gringotts. The shop was a living memorial, its heart still beating with the rhythm of their shared genius. George ran it with a steadfast dedication, a lone captain steering the magnificent ship they had built together. New products emerged, bearing the same hallmark of ingenious, joyful subversion, each one a testament to a philosophy that refused to die. The laughter that echoed under its enchanted ceiling was their lasting victory, proof that the light they ignited could not be extinguished by a single, cruel curse. Their story, passed from parent to child and between students in Hogwarts corridors, crystallized into legend. They became the archetype of the trickster hero, the ones who proved that courage could wear a grin, that rebellion could be packaged in a brightly coloured box, future generations of mischief makers clutching their own prototype canary creams or sketching plans for portable ponds, saw not a cautionary tale, but a blueprint. Fred and George had mapped the territory, demonstrating that brilliance need not be solemn, and that challenging authority could be an act of profound creativity. They inspired not just pranks, but a mindset, a refusal to be cowed, a belief in the strategic value of joy. At Hogwarts particularly, their spirit seemed to seep into the stones. The swamp they left behind was eventually cleared, but professors like Flitwick would sometimes, with a wistful smile, mention its impressive charm work. Peeves, the poltergeist, was said to doff his hat when passing a certain stretch of the fifth-floor corridor, paying respect to the greatest chaos engineers he had ever known. Their legacy was a perfect, poignant balance of joy and sorrow, a testament to the price of war and the resilience of laughter. They represented the cost of vibrant life cut short, a family forever marked by an empty chair at the table. Yet they equally represented the defiant, enduring answer to that darkness. Every shield hat that protected a magical creature enthusiast, every daydream charm that offered a moment of escape to a stressed ministry employee was a continuation of their fight. They had weaponized happiness, and that arsenal remained fully stocked. George, visiting the burrow, would sometimes catch his reflection in a window beside a photograph of the two of them, their arms slung around each other, laughing without a care. The man in the reflection was older, his eyes holding a depth of sorrow the boy in the picture could never have imagined. Yet in the set of his shoulders, in the occasional unguarded smirk, the essence of the twins endured. The partnership was gone, but the mission persisted. In the end, the magic of Fred and George Weasley was not confined to spells or enchanted gadgets. It was the magic of an unbreakable bond that transcended even death, a shared soul that left one half walking the earth and the other woven into the atmosphere of every joke told, every rule playfully bent, every moment of levity in a sometimes too serious world. Their story became an indelible part of Harry Potter's world, a streak of brilliant magenta paint across its history. They reminded all who remembered them that light is not just a wand's glow in the dark, but the spark of laughter in the face of fear, the enduring power of a shared smile. The mischief, though managed by one, was never truly over. It lived on in every flash of a firework, in every corner of the shop that bore their name, and in the silent, steadfast love of a twin who carried the memory of their bond like a second heartbeat, a whisper of laughter on the wind, forever echoing through the halls they had once filled with glorious, rebellious life. As we approach the end of this story, you may find yourself dozing off to sleep or becoming dreary-eyed, or maybe you're already asleep. In either case, it is time for me to fade away and let the dreams take it from here. Have a good night and enjoy some crackles from the fireplace to help you drift further into your deep slumber.